Hello and welcome back to 6 Degrees of Associations. We are so excited to be joined by Sharon Kneebone today. She is the Executive Director of the American Academy of Pain Medicine, and she has a really interesting story on how she came into that role. And I'm just going to kind of kick this off by having her introduce herself and maybe tell us a little bit about how the association world found her or how she found it.
So I came to the American Academy of Pain Medicine as the interim executive director. I was looking actually take a little bit of time off, figure out what I wanted to do next. And like many of my peers, I work with an executive coach. She told me about the opportunity and she said, Sharon, they need you. Should I put your hat in the ring? And I said, okay, did my homework. My contract was extended twice. The leadership would put the hardcore press on me to stay longer. And I said to them after going into the annual meeting in 2023, I've enjoyed every aspect of this, but let me come back from the annual meeting, let me have a break so my head is clear and make a decision. So we extended the contract then. Jim Zaniello from Vetted Solutions placed me here, and he and I had quite a few conversations. I encouraged our presidents at the time to have one-on-one conversations with him because this was never meant to be a permanent position. And I'm happy to say that we all agreed it was best for me and best for the Academy to stay on as their executive director. So January 1st of last year, I became the executive director for the American Academy of Pain Medicine. So that's how I ended up here. In terms of how association management found me, I have such a winding path in my career and how I ended up in a standalone executive director position. But how I found association management is I have to go back to my first job out of college. I went to Towson University. I was doing an independent study, and I was doing fundraising and special events for the Maryland Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund. They loved the plan I put together and they said, okay, implement it. This was end of February, beginning of March. And I said, great, that's wonderful. But I graduate in May. You're going to have to hire me if you really want me to implement this plan. So they talked about it. This was a commission established under, at the time, Governor Harry Hughes. And they hired me part-time in April. And the Monday after I graduated, I started full-time as a special events coordinator for the Maryland Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund. Tom Shaner was my state fundraising chair, and he owned an association management company. I didn't know anything about associations. I just knew that he did a lot of work with nonprofits, and he coordinated 2 of our fundraising events, the last patrol. The first one, they walked from Oakland to Ocean City, and then they walked from Southern Maryland to Federal Hill to raise money, which was pretty impressive. So fast forward, because of I used music as a tool to raise awareness. So that means we did a lot of local music fundraisers at Christopher's at the time where I got bands to donate their time. There was a door charge. We did fundraising going into it. I produced a Johnny Cash concert, a Roy Orbison concert. I produced a live album from one of the concerts that we did. Because of that work, I ended up in nightclub and restaurant marketing. Fast forward, mommy tracked it, 2 babies, in two years, and I stayed home and taught aerobics and worked my way up to aerobics and fitness director. When the kids got into 1st and 2nd grade, I needed stability. Tom and I ran into each other at a Vietnam Vets event, and he says, we worked really well together. I want you to come work for me. Didn't act on it then because I'd just taken a leadership role, but ran into him again and called him up and said, hey, you still have something available. And it turns out he did, an executive director role with an association management company. So I had worked in marketing and promotions and fundraising, done a lot of work with the media in Baltimore, and then ended up leaving the fitness industry where I did a lot of work there in terms of marketing and promotions and starting personal training programs, et cetera, into executive director for half of my clients and associate director for the other half of my clients. So I was thrown in the deep end without a life preserver. You're an executive director. Oh boy. So that's how I ended up here.
Okay, that is, there's a lot to talk about there, and I want to start out. I do want to learn more about what it was like to be that kind of temporary CEO and what that was like. But first and foremost, for all the young people out there who are working in associations and maybe aspire to be an executive director or at the top of that staff tier, what would you say to them that you've learned from your journey that you know that they could benefit from hearing it?
There is no one path to chief staff executive. I also think it's really important to note that this seat is not for everybody, and that's okay. You don't have to be a CAE and then go on to be a chief staff executive. As you alluded to, there's other chief staff positions within your vertical that are they're great and rewarding positions. I would say choose your own path and pick the path that works for you. My path was not linear. I started out as an executive director. From there, I went on to the parent organization of one of my clients. I started their chapter relations department. Then I went into governance for another organization that turned out to be a little too administrative for my skill set. Went to another organization where I ran their in-house association management services. I knew I needed to expand my skill set laterally, so I took a membership director position, which was heavily focused on component relations, which is the same skill set as a CEO, except you're managing from bottom up versus top down. Then I took time off and pursued a standalone position with a small national association. So my advice is follow your passion. To sit in this seat, whatever your passion is, it must be there. This is a lonely seat. It is a rewarding seat. And there's nothing else I would rather do in my career than to be a chief staff executive in the association world.
Now, I see that you do have a membership background for several years working at the Institute of Food Technologies, but I'm curious, what is, in your opinion and in general, because I think this might be association dependent, like which association we're talking about, but in general, what part of an association working in that part like best prepares you for the executive director position? Is it membership or is it something else?
It's something else. Membership is important. So the reason I took that membership role is I knew that there were technical components to it, which helped prepare me for the IT side of things, the operations side of things. But in terms of being an executive director, what really prepared me was working in an association management company. And the reason I say that is you have to be a generalist when you work with an AMC. You need to learn everything. You need to understand operations. You need to understand meeting planning. You need to understand communication, finances, governance, volunteer relations. That is the role that really prepared me more than anything. And then working up through laterally, the standalones or captured staff, as AMCs will call it, prepared me for the political side of working in a larger organization and different ways of doing things and a different pace. AMCs work at a much faster pace than do the larger organizations. So that AMC role is what gave me the foundation. And then going over laterally to the membership role helped expand some of my operations experience. There were still gaps, and there's a reason, and that's why I didn't stay at IFT. I I needed to be much more technical in terms of membership, and that's not where my heart is. My heart is working with a board of directors.
Is is the business of AMCs difficult? Are the margins thin, or like tell me about that? Is it stressful working in that environment versus being a full-time staff member? Can you just compare and contrast what it's like working in each kind of as a full-time staff directly for an association versus working for an association management company? Because I'm serious, I'm very interested in that dynamic, because it's kind of similar in reminding me of being like an in-house employee versus like an agency that serves an employee, maybe for like creative services or marketing. So tell me, compare and contrast for us the differences.
It's very much like an agency situation. And I want to preface what I'm going to say that it is very a personal choice on which you prefer, right? We're all human beings, we're all individuals. So the AMC, if you are not working for a dedicated or you are dedicated to one client, it is a much faster pace. You may be picking up the phone and answering questions about becoming a real estate appraiser on one call. The next call you're picking up and having a call with the state of Pennsylvania about accreditation for optometry or chiropractic for annual meetings. Or you may be picking up the next call for a PR team, one of your leaders for PR. So you need to be able to mentally switch and keep this mental Rolodex, if you will, or project management within your head to be able to switch quickly on a dime. Some people thrive in that environment. For me, I prefer working for a small to mid-size, I'd say mid-size association, because I do like a fast pace on the one hand, but what I really enjoy is, like, if you look at my LinkedIn page, one of my statements in there is I have a passion for helping boards of directors achieve their mission and vision. And what I care the most about in terms of this role is those are the relationships with your individual board members and leadership. They are the ones that chart the course. So it is, and you get to be 100% focused and immerse yourself within that particular organization. As chief staff executives, we are sponges. We have a distinct skill set as chief staff executives within the domains that stand for the Certified Association Executive. Therefore, we come with a skill set to help boards run their organization, set the vision, set the chart, tie vision and mission to operationals to build that bridge. But we also have to learn what they do. So we have to become sponges, and I prefer to become deeply immersed because I enjoy asking the 5 whys. I enjoy asking questions. I enjoy helping them figure out their space to thrive in through strategy, and then aligning operations with their strategy and their resources through their guidance, because their job is time, money, and people. They're the ones that get to allocate that. So it's really a personal preference. Some of my colleagues work for a dedicated one association with an association management company, but the structure and the systems and the processes belong to the AMC. When you're in a standalone, you have more opportunity to influence your environment and how the operations are going to proceed within the guardrails that the board establishes for you.
Yeah, I've never worked for an AMC, and I've only worked directly for associations, but I think it will benefit someone who's early on in their career to try to get the experience of working in both atmospheres and comparing and contrasting what you like about each different atmosphere, and then kind of weighing out the pros and cons on how you want to move forward. Do you think that's kind of a safe bet for someone that's new to the association space?
I would say so. And then there's the third model, which when I was with the Physical Therapy Association, at that time, they managed their components fee for service. So I was supervising 6 executive directors and 2 support staff in addition to my own clients. So I've worked in all 3 models: standalone, AMC, in-house run services. And they're all different and all need to be approached differently.
Okay, got it. And you kind of answered the question about what you prefer, what setting you think you thrive best in. So it sounds like, I think you said kind of small to medium size associations was your preference.
Yeah.
So tell us about the size and scope of American Academy of Pain Medicine. How big are you? What's your membership base look like? Let's kind of start there.
So we would be considered small in this organization. We're about 1.8 million budget. I have, 2 staff, and then I contract out other services. So I contract out for meeting and logistics. I have a fractional social media strategist. I contract out for assistance with our inbound marketing. We're implementing HubSpot. So with small staff, it's interesting because you are building a team around your skill sets. You want to hire for your blind spots. You don't want to hire a look-alike person. And even for medium size. So what I like about that is there aren't as many politics, as there's not as much politics involved when you have a larger organization, and we do get to move a little bit faster. We're nimble. We can respond to the market more quickly. We may not have as much time, money, or people. But because of that, in working with your board of directors, you can come to them and say, okay, you've got this great opportunity. What are we going to take off our plates to accommodate that? And it's much easier to do in a small to mid-sized organization. We have 1,300 members. The community that we serve is closer to 20,000. And that includes physicians, all kinds of different types of healthcare practitioners, from nurse practitioners to physician assistants, chiropractors, physical therapists, PharmDs, and industry. So we serve a pretty large community in terms of membership for the organization. And I'm just coming back from our annual meeting, which we just rebranded to Pain Connect, because we are multidisciplinary. So what I love about being multidisciplinary is there's lots of opportunity, but you have to be mindful because you can be a mile wide and an inch deep. So who is your primary target? Who are you going to serve? And I work with some incredibly smart and talented physicians, from residents to well-established attendings, as well as our advanced practice providers. So what I love about the American Academy of Pain is that they really care about the patient, and we keep the patient at the center of everything that we do. And how we help our patients is through educating the physicians and the healthcare providers that serve patients in pain.
But like, tell me about, for example, you just mentioned you rebranded to Pain Connect. That seems like it's something you would need some third party help with, or maybe there is someone on your staff that helped with that rebrand. Tell me about, just using that as an example, how you would find a vendor for that kind of project.
So we did most of the rebranding in-house. My degree is in communication with a concentration in public relations. How we did that is we pay for a professional ChatGPT account, which means that ChatGPT does not use our information for learning. And we took all the information. I took the surveys from the last 3 events. I read through all the notes. I did a lot of work. I did my own work first, market analysis, looking at our competitors, who are we targeting, and then we used that to help put framework around it, pulled it out, and then worked even more on it, and then worked with our leaders to refine the brand and what we are trying to do. In terms of communication, yes, we did use vendors. Most of the vendors I have found through word of mouth or through networking through my colleagues. Because pain medicine is a specific space, for our meeting planners, we use a meeting planner, and they're, for all intents and purposes, an AMC, but they are highly specific within the pain space. So they didn't have to learn our space, and they already have relationships with some of the industry that we work with. Most of our sponsorship and exhibitor sponsorship comes through relationships with our leaders, but having them in the space helps us a lot. We have found a programmatic digital advertiser that we found through one of our volunteer leaders, and I was really impressed with what they did. As an example, when we brought them on after leaving our previous agency, they were able to finally attribute sales to the digital advertising. And we walked through everything together. They figured out how to figure out, once that thank you note came up and what was spent, we have a dollar amount. That's the first time that's happened here. And quite frankly, it's the first time it's happened with any of the digital marketers that I've worked with who have to place a pixel in an AMS system. So I found them. And then I worked with HubSpot before. I've worked with some of the other well-known marketing platforms within our space. But HubSpot, as good as they are not the right people in terms of association management and pull marketing. We are a different animal than what they're used to. So they recommended a vendor within our space to do our onboarding. And that's how I found that vendor. And we did hire a education person who didn't work out. So what we're doing is actually using our meeting planner to do some more of the education. And then I'm using the vendor that onboarded us for HubSpot to build out some templates. But the reason we're able to do so much with a small team and distributed team is because we leverage technology to maximize staff capacity. And that is what's making all the difference in the world, and finding people who are smarter than us in the skill sets that are not in our core competencies.
That's awesome. Sounds like just really using the latest in technology and kind of just using your own expertise with the staff that you have. That's a really good blueprint for how to get something done in a pretty sounding efficient way. So, as we work towards wrapping up, I want to know a little bit more about that term you had as a temporary contract executive director. What was your expectations going into that role? Were you trying to figure out if like it was a kind of a mutually beneficial arrangement, or did you really have your eye on wanting to be there full time and permanently? Like, how did you deal with that kind of interesting dynamic?
I did not come into this expecting to stay in any way, shape, or form. And for the first 6 months, I kept reminding our leaders that we need to start preparing for your next leader. My job was to come in and document. In reality, I had to create. I had to update the financial systems, create classes. There was just nothing there because they used to be with an AMC. And as we stated earlier, when you work for an AMC or you're managed by an AMC, your systems and processes are the AMC's systems and processes for economies of scale. It's a for-profit organization running nonprofits. And as far as margins, which you asked earlier, you'll have to talk to them. I think it's going to vary by client and vary by the client mix that any AMC brings in-house. So that said, it was never my intent to stay. So in that role, it's really interesting. There is some research out there, and if somebody's interested in looking into an interim executive director career, I suggest they go to the ASAE Foundation and look at that research. Vetted Solutions also has some case studies on its website as they place interim executive directors. So when you're wearing that hat, you are trusted confidant, you are consultant, and you are executive director. It is a very different hat to wear than as the executive director. You have more latitude to share difficult truths, always with empathy. I always talk to aspiring chief staff executives or executive directors about what I call the 3 E's, and that is evaluation, education, and empathy. So you need to evaluate what's happening. You need to educate the people that you're working with, be they staff or be they volunteers, and you need to do it with empathy because everybody's trying to succeed. It is very, very rare that you'll run into a leader who wants to sabotage anything. In reality, they care very deeply about whatever it is that they may be loud about, and you need to dig deeper to find out what's going on. So the interim executive role is all about coming in and establishing trust. If an interim's coming in, it's either a planned transition, the previous executive director is leaving voluntarily or maybe not voluntarily. But either way, there's going to be things that need to be uncovered, and you need to be a confidant to staff if they need to share hard truths with you. You need to be a confidant to the leadership. They may need to share hard truths with you, and you need to be circumspect in how you communicate and build trust. And you need to get the leaders to articulate what success looks like to them. And then you need to do your evaluation and come back to them and say, and help renegotiate what really should be done based on your expertise as an executive director. I would not recommend someone who's never served as an executive director to come in as an interim. You really need to have practical experience and failed forward, as I like to call it, made mistakes, understand what happens when you don't build trust, when you can't operate at the speed of trust. So in that hat, you're consultant / chief staff executive. And then there's the transition when you transition to the executive director. And there is a very subtle change in that. They're like, okay, we got her. She's here. She's ours. And I think this year was the year where we had some really good, all good things happen. But in talking with our now immediate past president, the honeymoon's over. Like any job, you get this short window of the Cinderella period, right? Where it's all the low-hanging fruit has been plucked, is what I said. So now we're working on those midterm to long-term strategies while paying attention to what's going to keep us in business today. I just came back from participating with the American Academy of Neurology. We were invited to showcase some of our content there. And I've heard this from more than one vendor. We're hearing that AAPM has really turned around and is coming up from the edge or the ashes, as they say. I don't think they were ever to that part. They were in crisis because of not volunteer leadership, but because of a difficult transition from AMC to standalone. So we are making an impact, and that low-hanging fruit that we plucked is making a difference. And the Academy is one of the first pain management, pain medicine associations. So we are rebuilding trust, we're rebuilding relationships, and we just had a phenomenal meeting in Austin with our new brand. And next week I fly out to Salt Lake City to start working on 2026.
So I want to know, you just talked about the value of failing forward, and I think it's important before we end it here for you to tell us about a mistake that you've made and you would encourage other people in our industry of associations not to make.
So my first mistake, I had mentioned I was thrown into the deep end without a life preserver as an executive director. My very first task for the Maryland chapter of the Appraisal Institute was to call the location for the annual Christmas party and give them the head count. So I did that. I called, I spoke to them, I gave them the number of people that would be there. That was Tuesday. That was when the date was due. So then fast forward to that weekend, I'm home decorating a Christmas tree with my family, and I get a call from the owner, Tom Shaner, and he says, "Where's the caterer?" I said, "What do you mean, where's the caterer?" He's like, "Didn't you call to give the guarantee?" And I said, "Yes, I did call." So luckily, because of my background in the restaurant and nightclub industry, I had relationships and was able to help them get the catering done right then and there. The mistake I made was I followed the directive to the letter, but I didn't go a step further. So I was brand new on the job. And what I learned from that mistake is that you need to anticipate and you need to ask the next question. So even when I work with my direct reports, when they come to me, I had a situation not long ago where I had someone who was really quick to be responsive with all the new federal regulations that were coming out of the White House, where a federal employee may not be able to attend, and came back and immediately said, well, maybe they can do virtually. That shouldn't have happened. The next question should have been to that individual, will you even be able to participate virtually? Because by asking that, making that statement, the volunteer leaders now stopped looking for a speaker because they thought, okay, well, if they can't be there, they'll call in. And that wasn't the case. So it's a similar situation where you're not asking the 5 whys and systems thinking. There are additional consequences. So my advice to those who want to be the chief staff executive, learn to ask the unasked question. Learn to anticipate needs. It's always going to be a challenge. And the reason I say it's always going to be a challenge is every year or every other year you get a new president. We all have different styles. We all have to go through that 4 stages of a team and understand and negotiate how we're going to work together. So learning to ask the unasked question and the 5 whys. I was at a meeting with the National Society for Histotechnology at one of our chapters, and I was asked about how the board operates for NSH. And the secretary was in there, and I said, Loretta, what is the question I ask most frequently in a board meeting? And she looked at me and smiled, and she said, why? What problem are you trying to solve? Why do you recommend this? Why do we want to do this? So it's asking those additional questions that will set you apart.
Great stuff. I love it. I have nothing to add to that. It was beautifully said. Rewind that and listen again for another important lesson there. In the spirit of 6 Degrees of Associations, we always ask a guest to sponsor a guest, and then kind of we'll reach out and see if they have time to join us for another conversation. If nothing more, it's kind of a nice way to honor them and tip the cap to someone that maybe has helped you along your journey. Who would you recommend that we reach out to?
I have two people I'd like you to reach out to, and they're different stages of career, and they're both important. Adonia Calhoun Groom, she's with a liver specialty medical organization, and she's had an interesting path and challenges she's overcome as a chief staff executive. And then Alexis Redman Shermansky. So Alexis is approaching the beginning of mid-career, but she runs the student association at ASHA, American Speech Language Hearing Association. And she's someone who I think that you should talk to because of the steps she's taken to get where she is. So even though she's a staff member at ASHA, she is the chief staff executive for the Student Association within ASHA. And I think she's going to have some really interesting lessons. And again, Adonia Calhoun Groom, who's a standalone chief staff executive, has had some fun challenges that she's worked through to get where she is. Both incredibly smart. And then finally, Vicki Deal Williams. I don't know if you know her. She's actually the CEO for ASHA. And the reason I recommend her is because we were at ASAE's research think tank a couple weeks ago. We were talking about the DEI and meritocracy executive orders. And she had some really interesting things to say that what we should have always been doing for access, equity, inclusion, and that we should put in words what we mean in terms of actions. In other words, not just using the buzzwords that now have to be searched through websites to be deleted and then come up with new buzzwords that may get added to a different list. We really need to look at diversity, equity, inclusion, and access from our actions. And actually, the Academy was ahead of the curve on that. We don't have a DEI program, but how we are diverse and how we interact is embedded in who we are as an organization. And I think Vicki Deal Williams could help a lot of aspiring CEOs on how to navigate those difficult conversations and how we respond to external drivers in a really fantastic way. So I gave you 3 women.
That is above and beyond, which seems to be the MO of Sharon Kneebone. She's been our guest today on the 6 Degrees of Associations podcast. She is, of course, the executive director of the American Academy of Pain Medicine. Sharon, I cannot thank you enough for joining us today and sharing all that great stuff with us.
Thank you, Casey. I've thoroughly enjoyed our conversation, and I look forward to seeing who you're going to have on next.
Absolutely. All right. Take care, everybody.